Well, I want to welcome you back, and we're still with the discussion we're having today on the big story. We're talking about that prediction coming that this year, the flood might be even worse than what we experienced last year, with the indications and indices already there. Looking at some communities already experiencing flashes of flood already. And on the mining, we're not yet at the peak, which will definitely be in September. But anyway, signs are already there to show that that prediction by NIMET early this year or November last year is quite obvious and will definitely happen. But what will happen is, how really prepared are we, knowing that it's always a yearly occurrence? And should we always wait to the very end before we think of doing something? Well, early is just a question. But anyway, I still have both of my guests right here talking about how really important it is for us to talk about it. And I have no other person, but he's an activist and environmentalist, and I'm talking of Bedford, and also a member of the Nigerian Environmental Society Delta State Chapter, Mr. Victor Sonji. But anyway, let's continue with this discussion. I know Ahmed, the DG of NEMA, said we should pray that undermining the predictions are not good, but we should pray that this year will not be as worse as 2022. So my prayer, I do know Nigerians are very religious people. Is there a thing of prayer? Because should we be expecting for a miracle as the parting of the Red Sea by Moses in the Bible? On the mining, I doubt if anybody has that special rod. But so my question is, why? Is it a thing of prayer or preparation? And why do we always have government, and not just on the state level, but federal level, fail to prepare on time? Is it that we Nigerians do not hold them accountable, knowing the disaster that is looming over our heads? Therefore,
for me, it is laughable to see that year in, year out, we are faced with this kind of predicament as a country. You know, the government is saddled with the responsibility, to protect lives and property of the people, of the citizens, at state level, at federal government level, even at local government level. But we have seen over the years that has not been the case, because issues of devastation, we are not the only country that has coastal lines, but you could see in the Western world, you could see how prepared they are in mitigating, in indeed approaching the challenge and getting solutions. For us, they have reduced us to prayer and making God to always perform miracles, things that we can do for ourselves, and we are waiting for God. It can imagine a DG saying that we should pray. What we should pray about? God has given us brain, God has given us resources to manage our resources. When he put Adam in the garden, he said, tend and keep. He did not say, I will now not allow the flood to come.
It's obvious we all know the Bible, though.
But we all know the Bible. But you can see how laughable that scenario is. For me, the citizen must begin to hold the government accountable by suing the federal government, by suing state government, because this has been a recurrent activity, but yet nothing is being done. They go home with fat pockets and leaving us to die, and leaving us to, because the effect of the flood is not only immediately after the flood goes. Some persons have not still recovered from the flood. I remember last year, somebody lost virtually everything in his house because he raised up his stuff and left the house for another place. Coming back after the flood, everything, both his television, his documents, everything was submerged in the flood, and he had to start life all over again. I bet you, up till now, he has not recovered from, because what is the palliative? Another one is glooming, and they are telling us that we should pray and we'll wait for palliative. How much is palliative? How much do they want to give to us? The money that you want to use as palliative, why don't you use that money to prepare effectively? To avert the effect of that flood. You can cushion it, of course. It is a regular, it is a yearly occurrence, but nevertheless, there are things that we must do, that federal government is capable of doing to reduce the effect of the flood. For me, I want indigenous, cooperative, institutions to begin to question governments in competent court, to say that you have been killing Nigeria, you have been killing us over the years without recourse to our health, without recourse to our people. That is the way forward, I think.
Well, let me bring you into the discussion now, Mr. Victor. Is it that this is just beyond the federal and the state government? Because I'm asking, look at our coastal line. Is it that, it's so large that the federal government just can't handle it? And we do know we are in really economic dark situation, and because of that, the federal government might really not have the necessary funds to handle it? Because I really want to know, is the cost like just so much for the federal government to deal with? That's on account of it. That's why we year in, year out, we end up having disaster on a very large scale and nothing to show for it.
Two things I find disgusting is when government officials tell you to pray. And I'm a practicing Christian, so you can't tell me about prayer. We pray all the time. But remember, at the end of every 4 years, we'll go to submit our rights to self-help through the ballots, through votes and ballots. So when we have done all of that, we expect that government will live up to its obligations and its responsibilities. So telling us to pray is
quite laughable.
Quite laughable and disappointing. Then you talk about capacity. I do not think the government of Nigeria does not have capacity to tackle flood or to tackle the consequences of flood or to even help mitigate or even help prepare citizens. But what we've been having is these entertaining press releases, messages of warnings and what have you, setting up of committees. I don't know if we've become a government of committee by committee and for committees. Every time you just keep seeing the same approach: clear water highway, clear water hyacinth, clear drainages and what have you. Still, we can't even lay our hands on anything any meaningful progress. We have just 853 kilometers of coastline, of which Ondo State accounts for the largest portion, 180 kilometers. Canada has more than 200,000. We have other countries around the world that have these issues, but it's just an issue with
the political
irresponsibility in government of public officers, if you ask me. Because you have all the necessary infrastructure to predict, but you do not have the infrastructure and the will to mitigate.
Okay, now I want to still remain with you, Mr. Victor. Now let's look at urban flooding, because that's another major one we need to look at, judging of where we are. And it is even forecast to be severe this year, largely due to poor drainages and also due to most persons not really dealing with the issue of proper drainage. But a drive around town before this very program, we did so on Sunday. A drive around town here in Ughelli, we've seen some persons, little or no de-seating of these drainages. And even if the ones they have, they've not been able to evacuate the waste on it. Is it that we also, as a people, we fail to understand the impact this flood has on us and what devastation it will bring if we fail to do the right thing? Because, come on, you cannot expect the government to do it all. Go to some places, you are always waiting for the government to de-seat the drainage. We do know by law it is basically there for government to do, but should we also not take the bull by the horn and do the little we can to avert such looming disasters?
Taking the bull by the horn will depend on the mood of the bull. Okay? What I expect citizens, let's not transfer our rights to the government and at the same time expect us to perform what we have transferred our rights to the government to do for us. Government is supposed to de-silt.
Okay.
What citizens ought to do is to manage or stop indiscriminate disposal of waste. When go around town, ask around. I'm sure you did that.
Yes.
People who clear these drainages.
Are just there by the
Yes, are just there by them. And they are the shop owners, the persons annexing those drainages are the ones who finance this process. That's reports getting to me. So what is wrong in government bringing trucks and vehicles to evacuate them, since the citizens themselves have cleared their drainages? Remember, flash flood, which is usually from rain and torrents, affects urban centers more than the river floods and the storm surge. So government at least should even focus on urban centers and mitigate in urban centers. You only need 6 inches of moving water to knock you down, as tall as you are, Mr. Mike. You only just 6 inches of moving water. You need just 2 feet of moving water to carry a vehicle. So what is the government doing about that? The only thing citizens are expected to do, or I will recommend, or I will expect them to do, is to manage waste. That we are doing as an NGO by encouraging people to know how to collect their waste and dispose them properly. But again, when we even collect this waste and when citizens collect this waste and want to dispose, we don't know where the government takes them to.
Anyway, that's another question. Now let me come to you, Berafor. And we do know Doye Diri, the governor of Bayelsa State, as well. Anyway, you said he has set a committee. Yes, we also do know that committee is in place, and they already started work in destroying or removing rather houses and structures blocking waterways because of the severity of last year's flood. We saw that committee in work, and we know they've started that destruction. But let's look at it now. It's always sad to have a structure that has been put there with millions of naira, having approval from some agencies of government to erect, and now being destroyed. But how really serious is that in clearing the waterways, especially in Bayelsa State, to help to deal with this issue of flood?
Well, these deliberate measures must be taken for deliberate reasons.
Of course.
Of course, that this flooding has been affecting us over the years.
Mm.
I also blame the citizens, for lackadaisical attitude
yeah.
in terms of managing their wastes, and disposing it properly.
Yeah.
There's a central point as a government. There's a central point where waste are collected and being disposed.
Of course.
But you could see due to that waste also has its own economy. So you could see those people gathering. They are what they call them. They call them a name. Scavengers. You could see scavengers entering the streets. And scavenging even in the streets. It ought not to be so. There must be deliberate action to now put laws to say scavengers should go to the dump sites. That is where scavengers should be, to gather.
That developed line, that's how it is.
That's how it should be. There's a law to that even in Nigeria, but of course, implementation has been the challenge. For Doye Diri, Bayelsa State government, at least you could see deliberate efforts being made by the state government, particularly in the urban area, to clear drainages, to clear waterways, water passages. Of course, we don't have so much drainages in Bayelsa, but however, the little that we have, you could see some level of work being put in. For River State government, I went to River State recently, and I saw that SIM has employed a mechanism, C4 mechanism to to clear the drainages, to clear the gutters and all of that, to ensure that there's smooth movement of water. Because of course, water will always find its way. If there's no proper drainage, water will find its way. But I also blame the citizenry. We must be responsible. If you go to other climes, citizens are responsible. You must show that level of responsibility before you can blame the government. But if you notice very, very clearly, you see some level of relaxation. Everything the government should do, everything the government should do. There are levels, there are things that we must do as citizens to ensure that we have done our part and leave the rest for government. Because government is for every one of us. We are the government. Government is not just the political class, elite. We also have contribution. We make economical contribution. We should also make environmental contribution to safeguard our environment.
Well, we're talking about economical, and I want us to still remain with the effect, because it looks as if we talk and people do not understand the effect of the impending disaster, they will not really know. Now, recently we had the highest inflation rate for the month of May and then June when released, and the inflation rate is 18-year high. It's put at 22.41% on account of the rise in food price, and that's why I had that rise in inflation. And if you only look at it, the reason for the rise in food price is hinged on two major issues. Number one, the insecurity, but largely because of last year's flood, and that's why we saw the food price. And funny enough, even the impact of food price is even there for us to see. Like the killing of a first-class graduate in Bayelsa State on Sunday on account of stealing bread. Undermining, nobody will condone such. But really, let's look at the impact. If we do have this disaster of having the flood this year, how really seriously would it be when it comes to our food security? For next year and this year. For next year and this year,
it will be devastating. The rise in food price, I can imagine that we now buy custard of Gary for over 1,000 naira. I can imagine.
That's what you buy there. In Ugeli here is about 1,500 naira.
That's what I'm saying. I can imagine that is what we get for like 100 naira or 200 naira some years ago. Not quite long, but
and they do not import Gary.
We don't import Gary. So of course, the issue of storage also comes in. So the issue of storage, the issue of food security is a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and you could see if you don't eat well, of course you'll be malnourished. You have health issues. You now have hunger issues. You know, this flood, if not that is one of the adverse effects. Hunger, food insecurity, starvation. People will die of starvation if flood does not kill you, hunger will kill you. That is the scenario that we are painting. For me, I did my own analysis, and I see that inflation will be increasing by the month. As the month is going, it will be increasing due to the impending flood. But kudos to the federal government. They've opened they've said they've opened
but then the borders is in process, and I was quite sure if Gary will be coming from down here rather than the Gary will be going from here down there.
No, the Gary will be going it's a challenge. And it's not only just food challenge. We have educational challenges that will also take place. We also have psychological challenges, because people will now be confined, not to move anyhow. Because and at that, of course, your mind is you could see what happened during the COVID. You could see how many persons took their life for boredom. You could see how many people had mental issues, and that will be the scenario if that will be one of the effects of the flood. There are psychological issues, there are food issues, there are educational issues, there are marital issues that will, of course, quarrels and all of that.
That's if people will not be having the men in the house.
No.
But anyway,
they can't stay in the house in hunger.
Okay, well, anyway, that's for real. But let me come to you now, Victor, and really ask you a similar one. Now, yes, we also do know that some state governments, especially in the South, on account of that prediction from NIMET, started saying they're already getting prepared for palliative to deal with the issues of the impending flood. But my question is, like you stated earlier, is it getting money for palliatives or getting money to deal with the problem? Why are we always so slow in our reactions to things? We always prepare to solve, but don't prepare to stop.
Mike, I'll tell you one of the reasons why our governments are a bit lackadaisical is probably because God is a Nigerian. God is a Nigerian. That's why He showers us with so much goodwill, blessings, and resources, and we are nowhere near disaster management on the global rating. You see, if government would rather spend on palliative than preparation, or prefers to spend on palliative than preparation, that shows you how bad things are. I frankly do not have a problem with palliative, but what I have a problem with is spending more on palliatives when you could spend less to mitigate or prepare for these issues. I saw a very disturbing, although it's not part of this discourse, but I saw a very disturbing report that the federal government is trying to seek 500 billion naira for palliative. On the subsidy removal. On the implications, on the effects of subsidy removal. And you just told us that you saved only 400 billion. So why are you using 500 billion as palliative when you just saved 400 billion? Is there a justification for that? No. Then I also want to address one of the points you raised about property development. You see, I told you the other time, until government manages human settlement, it cannot manage the environment. It cannot manage the consequences of environmental. The flooding comes with a lot of issues: erosion, environmental degradation, ecological disruptions, economic inflation. Even if you are not affected by the flood directly, you are affected by it indirectly. We are just talking about inflation. Yeah. The inflation affects everybody, including the people in power. Yes. So if your budget for the week is, say, 200,000 before the flooding, by now you should have raised it to like 250 or 300. So those are the consequences that citizens and government should avoid at all costs.
Well, anyway, the cost is really massive, but I'll just plead with you guys to hold on. We need to also solve our cost in what we do and go on the commercial break. But when we come back, we'll continue our discussion as we try to make it more interactive. We're talking about the impending disaster. Anyway, let me not sound as a prophet of doom, but rather the looming disaster as it concerns flooding, and with that very prediction from NIMET, and especially with the rising waters, majorly around communities in the coastline, and funny enough, even right here in major cities. But what should be done? And are we not too late to do anything about it, knowing that the floods will definitely be from July to September? Well, it's another question, but we need to go on a break though.